Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll introduce myself and my co-hosts. We have one other who's due to join us very shortly, but rather than keep you waiting, we'd rather press on, make this as interesting and informative for you as possible. So in case you haven't met me before on either one of these webinars or across various industry functions, I'm Tim Barclay. I'm the CEO of Apello, and I've had the privilege of leading the organization for the last 3.5 years or so. And during that time, I'm proud to say we've made enormous progress in bringing digital TECS and telecare services to the sector. The purpose of today, though, is not purely to blow our own trumpet, although there is a little bit of that, I'll be absolutely honest, but is to share some learnings from a survey that was conducted in conjunction with the Housing LIN, and this is on the back of the second of 3 reports, which we'll cover more details of in a moment or two. First, though, let me introduce my fellow co-presenters. Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Stratford. I'm the Commercial Director for Appello.
And
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ian Hockings. I'm Head of Marketing at Apello. I will be moderating the questions, so please use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the presentation.
We usually get a really good string of questions, so please don't make this any different from the other variants. Across the bottom, you'll find the icon that says questions, and if you just use that, that will be your opportunity to add your thoughts, questions, comments, which we'll answer at the end. In the meantime, I'll run through some of the content that was the main learnings from this aspect of the survey. Just to give you some backdrop, just need to move that on. There we go. The report, as I mentioned, was the second in a series of 3. This one was focused very much on what were the enablers that came through from the report in terms of making a difference to the quality of life and quality of living experience in sheltered housing. I can see we've been joined by Jeremy from the Housing LIN. Jeremy, you'll get your moment to introduce yourself in a second or two, because we're just teeing up the conversation we're about to have. The survey, I'm delighted to say, which was promoted by the Housing LIN, generated over 120 survey responses from 120 senior housing professionals, so a really broad span and really insightful in terms of both the things that there was common agreement over, as well as the things that there were differences of opinions over, and we'll try and bring a little bit of colour to that as we did in the previous webinar. First of all, though, a few words about our respective organisations. So Apello, in case you're not familiar with us, are a slightly over 30-year-old business. Telecare monitoring has been our bread and butter for that time, and in the more recent years, we've focused very heavily on the digital benefits that telecare and TECS can provide. We are by far the market leader in both digital monitoring services and also digital communal group living schemes. Our smart living solutions are deployed across more than 10,000 residents across somewhere between 250 and 300 housing sites these days, and growing at 20+ a month. So a really, really strong endorsement of the difference we can make when we put digital capabilities into environments like sheltered retirement or specialist housing. So that's a few words on Apello. Jeremy, if you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself and the Housing LIN.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. The Housing LIN, also known as the Housing Learning Improvement Network, brings together housing, health and social care professionals to champion innovation in terms of the way we deliver our housing for an ageing population. Our legacy is that we used to manage both the Building Telecare in England programme and the Extra Care Housing Fund at the Department of Health. And we saw very early on the need to integrate digital within our housing offer. So we're delighted to partner with Apello, both with these surveys that Tim has shared, but also to take forward how we can extend learning to a broader community.
And we were chatting before we went live about just the span and breadth of your network, which is, I mean, it's in the tens and tens of thousands of people now. So a really fantastic cross-section across the various housing and TECS communities.
And in fact, I've just come off a call with NHS England and the future role of the anticipatory care networks. So this is all about, how to deliver better primary care at home, to look at hospital avoidance. And tech is going to play such a big role in that telehealth, telemedicine side, as well as supporting through digital communications, case management, etc., for primary care staff.
Fantastic. Well, I think that tees up the conversation we're about to have really nicely. There were, in this second report, we focused on 4 main learnings that came through, particularly around how you can improve the quality of living experience in sheltered and retirement accommodation. And the first was about interoperability and using open standards to make sure you have the widest range of devices available to you now and in the future. And just to give some color to that, over 66% of the respondents said they would expect to see more usage of technology for managing well-being in the year ahead. And not surprisingly, 77% that they would see more usage of technology for managing health. And that ties very much into the conversation that Jeremy was just referring to there, happening both at the NHS level, at the care in the community level, social care, and across housing providers. What was interesting from a housing provider perspective is that slightly over half also felt that they would see more usage of technology for controlling the living environment. And this is something that's been around for a little while, and it seems now potentially over the course of the next year or two may gain real traction, using diagnostics to be able to anticipate, maybe even prevent, but certainly recognize faster than under normal circumstances that physical environments such as heating, lights, boilers, etc., water, are not running in the way that they normally would. So some really interesting observations from the respondents. What was clear from some of the comments, both in terms of the questions that have been posed to us in advance of this on the right-hand side, as well as the feedback that was either based on various verbatims on the left-hand side, is that smart technology is now maturing in terms of both the capabilities it offers, but also in terms of housing providers' understanding of what the real benefits are that it's able to deliver. Now, to maximize those benefits, in an ideal world, housing providers want to be able to knit together various different solutions. So a open source platform that you can then add particular peripherals or particular IoT, Internet of Things devices, either for managing individuals' health or for managing the estate, as I mentioned earlier. And I think it definitely struck a chord with a number of the ladies and gents who've registered for this. Our registrations is the word I was struggling to find. As you'll be aware, when you did register this, there was an opportunity to raise questions in advance. And the first of those was what will become the go-to standard for digital TECS. Now, Mark, you are very experienced in the area of standards and work with the BSI on standards writing and standards setting. Do you want to give a few words on where you think digital standards are headed over the course of the months and years ahead?
Yeah, so I think the go-to standards are going to be the British and European published standards. Standards are about consistency and delivering clear benefits, making sure that customers are not locked into one supplier. So standards like Now IPs, which has recently been published as BSA 521 Part 2, Standards like this ensure that signalling is secure, it's documented, it's clearly documented requirements. So things like having to have a system heartbeat every 20 to 40 minutes is a new standard that's set into a digital published standard, but wouldn't be possible on an analog system. Right now, the standards bodies are working really hard to update standards to reflect all of the advances in digital technology that we're going to see. So I think that's where we're going to be going in the near and mid-term.
And would you say that the standards are sufficiently well understood at the moment for it to be an area that housing providers can embark on, or do you think that there needs to be more maturity in the standards?
I think it's a bit of both. So we've got some great standards now, which really should be understood and should be used. There's some installation type standards which need some work. But in terms of the key standards, so the transmission standards in terms of protocols and the transmission standards in terms of radio frequencies are there, they're open, they're published, and really they need to be used.
Jeremy, this second question plays very much into what you were just talking about, where the question was whether or not COVID will see an improved integration between social care, health, and technology. You've clearly just been involved in this conversation, but you've also been involved in this conversation for a number of years. Where do you think we're at?
I think, you know, we've had various sort of waves of this, if I can use that term, and we're at the moment, I think, at a point where, because of probably crisis management in the NHS, they recognise that there's a major shift in the way we need to think about how we look at hospital avoidance and diversion techniques, and not an automatic referral to a care home, but also to think about how supporting people at home better with appropriate accommodation, with appropriate technology, and it aids adaptation. So there's a whole system approach which is built around the customer is something that they see. But the danger, I think, we have still resident, and we need to make sure that the custody to use that technology to both self-care and self-manage, but also to make sure the information is in place to advise and guide social care and health to do the interventions that really matter. So I see technology being a way of supporting that diagnosis, to capture the data that Mark was talking about, and to use it in a way that can really benefit better outcomes for residents, patients, carers, etc.
And do you think the pace of adoption has made a step change as a result of COVID?
I think it has on one level. I think there's I would say there's sort of three levels probably. At the baseline, in terms of ensuring improved communications, both within residents groups, whether it's in specialist or supported housing, or with professional staff in terms of managing things like loneliness and isolation, or possibly the challenges of where somebody is experiencing anxiety or depression as a result of lockdown. The second bit is really where there's a more there's a stronger ability for workforce to work together. We're seeing, as a result of COVID, much more multi-agency and multidisciplinary working. Yeah. So again, using technology, using the platform to enable the sharing of data. I think some of the challenges we had last year around GDPR have shown that in crisis, we really need to improve those sort of techniques for sharing high-level content while still at the same time having degrees of privacy. So it'll be interesting for Mark to see if there are further developments on that. And thirdly, it's making sure that the technology, the hardware, is safe, reliable, easy to use, and backed up through digital, so that we can ensure that we have information at our fingertips and not having to wait 4 minutes perhaps for a signal to come through or whatever. But what we found, I think, over the sort of like last 6 months or something or more, is that digital connectivity is still fairly problematic for certain groups in the community in certain places across the UK, especially in some sort of more rural areas. And we know for many vulnerable adults, perhaps also families who also have had homeschooling, only have the use of one mobile phone, using that in a multiple different way has its own challenges. So I think we've got a way to go as a result of COVID, but the platform, I think, is solid.
Excellent. And Mark, in terms of this third question, do you think the degree to which all of the devices in a current and future world are able to interoperate and are operating on open standards, do you think that drives down the cost of TECS, the cost of deploying wider services?
So open standards are about driving a common approach really for manufacturers. So yeah, theoretically, it could reduce things like evaluation costs, which would have a knock-on effect with the device costs. But I think that device and platform integration, as Jeremy's already said, is where we'll see the largest benefit, because when the data platforms are integrated, that's when we can actually see the cost coming down of retrieving and acting upon that data.
And that's all about having really rich insight so that carers or housing providers can deliver the right service to the right person at the right time, and in doing so, optimize their cost base. Is that the model you're talking about?
Absolutely.
Cool. Tim, I was interested in a few months ago, our Prime Minister talked about a type of Green Deal. So our houses need to be retrofitted for home insulation and affordable warmth and affordable heating, and to tackle fuel poverty. And obviously, as we're approaching the winter, issues around cold and heat are going to be much more prevalent. It feels to me, in terms of this, there's probably also a need for our sector to come together to see whether if there's a tech deal that we can offer as well, which is very consumer orientated. We have quite a few pilots and innovative ideas floating around, which government are thinking about. NHS England, LGA, yourselves and others are really working on. But it seems if we can sort of harness our combined intellect, but also intel, and look at the way that digital supply can sort of support that, perhaps we can think about a tech deal in the future.
I think that's absolutely right, and it's one of the themes that when we talk to housing providers, they repeatedly talk about the value that they get from having a concerted and cohesive approach across supply chain, and for a wider and best understanding of what's available, and I do think that will be a bigger feature, as you say, of the months and years ahead. If I move on to the next of the next of the slides and the next of the theme areas, this was about driving benefit from cloud services, and I think we have a very clear instance of where cloud has been of help to housing providers, and that's in terms of video communication between residents and staff, as they've been able to work more remotely but provide really good service levels still for their housing organisations and for their end customers. But I think there's quite a bit of misnomer about what cloud is and what cloud isn't. So Mark, would you just give a flavour of what really is a cloud-based service and why it's of benefit?
Yeah, so being clear, cloud isn't a remote connection to the office. It isn't a thin client like Citrix where I access some other servers. What cloud is the on-demand availability of computer resources, like data storage, like computer power, like memory, and that data being delivered from a commercial-grade data center with industrial-grade security in a standard configuration. That's what cloud's about. So it's portable, it's secure, and it's delivered in a commercial grade professional environment.
And that all sounds very Google and very Microsoft, but what does it actually mean for a housing provider? What's the opportunity of cloud?
What it means is it allows us to access services in a very secure environment, but in a very easy way. So it means that I can use my laptop with a browser and the right security to access all of the services that I need to see. So, for example, a monitoring centre in COVID that wants to work at home, rather than having to have a VPN or some form of connectivity to my service in the office, which is a restriction and which takes time to set up, I want to have an operator that works at home with a laptop and a headset plugged into that laptop to just take calls wherever I am. So it breaks down the geography of actually having to access these services.
And what do you think that this will do in terms of access to data from a housing provider point of view?
What it allows us to do is integrate different data sets and create much richer data sources. And again, as Jeremy has already said, the integration of the platforms. If they're cloud platforms, it means that these platforms can be integrated, it means that data sets can be shared. And when they're managed well, it means that multiple data sets can be accessed from anywhere by the right people in a secure environment to help us with decision support, to help us understand and manage the services that we're delivering.
And does that make them faster?
Absolutely, it makes them significantly faster, as well as a lot more secure.
I'm sure to a lot of people, cloud is still quite a nebulous concept. I think everybody, though, would recognise the principle of having better, more secure access to a wider set of their customers' data and being able to act on that without the frustrations of having to dial in over a VPN and I'm sure we've all had the getting kicked out at key moments scenarios. With all of the challenges, Jeremy, that housing providers are already faced with, this increasingly exciting but fast changing landscape probably means there needs to be a change in the way procurement is done and the way organisations think about what services they want to buy. What do you think are going to be the major trends in that space?
Yeah, that's again a good question. I think I think we've gone from the traditional head of IT, and we need to really think, what is our virtual service going to be? And again, coming back to your earlier question, with COVID, we know that there's been a nearly 80% increase in the number of people working from home over the last 6 months, and the common platform will be through your PC and Wi-Fi and digital. So, the cloud technology means that both housing associations and care home operators, home care operators will need to think about how they look at how they buy space, how they sort of can safe storage, as Mark has said, but also how that can be portable. And the beauty of this is a lot of it can be, so that, if you are having to work remotely, you have the access to that data your fingertips. But in terms of the procurement of that, I think there are probably ways that we need to sort of both educate and inform those people who are both procuring sort of cloud-based technologies, but also how that it's being commissioned as well. And I think there's probably a little lag for some people who are working and have perhaps only just recently got iPads to work in there from home, to somebody who's then being told, this now go to cloud-based as well.
You touch on a really interesting thing, which is about the service delivery aspect. I think one of the wonderful opportunities that exists over the course of the near and longer term future is that this won't be purely an IT and procurement led set of decisions. This will be increasingly about how can we genuinely redesign the service we deliver to customers? What's the experience we want them to have? What's the changes over the course of the next few years that we want them to enjoy? What do we want them to have access to? And having whole organizations input into that desired state of living experience, and then understanding from techs and technology vendors about how you go away and deliver it. I think that's going to be one of the things that must be the biggest change, must be about how do we deliver our company's aims, objectives, mission statements? How do we transform environments, living and working environments? And once that thought has been, what do we want it to look like? Then you can start the exercise of how might we enable it.
Absolutely. And what strikes me with cloud is that we're moving very much from a physical infrastructure. You know, for those of us who've worked in telecoms for 100 years, you know, we don't have the big exchange at the end of our road anymore. We're moving away from that type of asset base to a digital asset base. And that's what cloud offers us.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's genuinely exciting about all of this is that opportunity to use the evolution to be able to rethink entirely new clean sheet of paper models. And I know you already get engaged with organizations who want to take that clean sheet of paper approach.
Yeah, and you know, and going forward with COVID in mind, you know, the conversation at the moment about our high streets, about the 15-minute city, a lot of that is around how we create closer connectivity with people, perhaps using our office spaces and other buildings and environment differently, so that people with disabilities can be helped in terms of navigating strange and unfamiliar territories, cloud-based technology helping them to guide through that, right through to sort of where there needs more sort of direct intervention. So yeah, I think we've got a, you know, the office could be the cloud of the future.
Without doubt. And one of the, I think for anybody on this call, from a housing provider perspective, one of the things that's genuinely exciting is this is an opportunity for more face time with residents rather than less, for more interaction with them. Yes, more of it may be in a virtual environment, but their needs and their wants can still be, and in fact increasingly measured and be monitored, engaged as a result of the ability to have a work from anywhere scenario.
Yeah, and what I also like is how residents themselves can engage and communicate together in, you know, in a safe environment as well.
Yes, absolutely. And on this wider theme of innovation, one of the conversation points that came through in the report was, again, these themes of more use of technology, but at the same time, a lack of specific expertise within the organization to know how to be able to scope it, design it. And one of the things that I really want to come back to is this point of, in many ways, the innovation needs to come from a blend of inside and outside organizations. If a housing provider can conceive what they want a better way of living to look like for their residents, whether that's more understanding of their well-being, more ability to reduce social isolation, whether that's a requirement to have faster insight into utilities which aren't working, all of those are just examples of what's possible. But starting with that blank sheet of paper of what do we want our experience to look like for our residents and for our housing managers and so on, is the piece the housing provider can bring to the party. And then it's down to organizations like ourselves and other TECS experts to be able to work out what are the variety of platforms, some from us, some from other innovation businesses, that can deliver those kind of experiences. Mark, a question for you, I think out of the ones on the right straight away, how do housing providers balance that challenge of staying reasonably well abreast while at the same time not trying to become specialists or experts in every variety of changing technology?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. It's understanding the needs that the technology meets, and I think it's not having tech for tech's sake. So it's understanding that this technology is well thought out. It's what is going to deliver the right service, and it's the ability actually to measure that service delivery as well, and look at services that are based on documented need, and then understand the historical data, which gives a much more accurate indication of the needs and, of course, the effective outcomes.
Completely right. And in terms of commercial opportunities for organisations as a result of TECS?
I think it's things like Wi-Fi hotspots in resident apartments. So we've got to be mindful that a lot of our service users don't have access to Wi-Fi. So being able to provide that on a basic internet connectivity, or things like GP video feeds to a room unit, residents having video calling to friends on their site or actually off-site to another site. And the other piece, I think, is things like adding smart capability to peripherals. So by that I mean, if I've got a cheap Bluetooth speaker that maybe allows me to answer a door call from my chair, but then having smart pendant that can actually release the door so that I don't have to get out of my chair, A, to see who's at the door, B, to release the door. And certainly on a professional level as well, if we look at professional caregivers, things like having a member of staff who can video call residents at 5 different sites, so they can spend a day just making calls, just talking to residents and just delivering the basic of services.
So those commercial opportunities, some of those you're referring to are about cost avoidance, so reducing the cost of running service, and some of those are about creating offers which can be resold into residents. Is that your pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to look at it both ways. There's a lot of cost avoidance as well as the ability to actually create the commercial opportunity.
And where do you think? So one of the questions was somebody's developing a large extra care scheme. Where do they look for new innovations?
So there's a few things we need to consider, and the first thing is obviously building infrastructure. So new innovation needs Cat5 or Cat6 cabling. But I think that there's a couple of big things here for me is making sure that the TECS you're considering has documented and is using documented and standard open protocols. And things, think about things like remote monitoring, video applications, remote maintenance. How do we keep the software upgraded? And when we're upgrading that software, how do we ensure continuation of service? And the other piece for me is what cloud services can we plug into this? So what's available? How can your services and user interfaces keep up with services? Because we know that cloud services develop at quite a rate. So how do we make sure that we can deploy them? We can deploy them in an easy and understandable manner so that services become available in the years to come, and residents that are just moving into the kind of sheltered services now will be able to consume the services now, but as services expanding it better, they'll be able to consume them in the years to come.
Yeah. And Jeremy, there's clearly a lot of options available to housing providers. Where would they look for best practice?
Well, that's like giving me a free shot at goal, that, Tim. So thanks very much. Obviously, as a learning and improvement network, we're really keen to capture the latest innovations and good practice. And indeed, I've just posted in the chat box the website, the web link to our Going Digital pages, which showcase a number of different examples of both nationally and internationally. But one of the things we've done is look beyond tech in terms of technology-enabled care, but we're calling it technology-enabled care and housing, so TECH, which is quite neat. But we do want to raise awareness and innovations around that. And what we are doing very carefully is making sure that the information that's suitable for the health and social care operators, we sift that so we can make sense of it for housing operators and vice versa. Because I think one of the challenges around the innovation is the language of innovation and how it's being used differently for different sectors. And Housing LIN is very keen to build on some of the learning that we've done over the last 10 years with the happy design principles to develop a sister set of documents called TAPI, Technology That Aids Our Aging Population, a panel for innovation. So in the next 3 or 4 weeks, we very much hope to formally launch a small inquiry that will try to capture the types of innovations are out there and also to articulate those so that the issues that Mark talked about, standards around regulation, all those sort of things can be part of an ongoing debate which can really consolidate a better both consumer understanding but also sort of a practitioner and provider confidence.
And it is that real practical experience that many of the people on this call will really welcome.
Yeah, so a good example is that Innovate UK have funded a piece of work just to accelerate some of the thinking with a small startup called the London Rebuilding Society, who do a lot of equity release products for people who live in very poor quality housing. And what they're finding is through the use of building management systems, they're able to identify people who are fuel poor or are using energy inefficiently. But what we've been talking to them about is, do you know if those people who are experiencing fuel poverty and may have hypothermia, what's the impact on their health and well-being, and what sort of health and social care intervention? So how can we make this more interoperable, both in terms of the standards and the facilities, but also we sort of hardwire housing, health and social care together?
Spot on. Absolutely right. I think that's one of the things that we've learned is that opportunity for greater collaboration, and it leads neatly into the fourth and final of the 4 takeaways from this stage of the survey. You won't be surprised at all, audience, to learn that 9 out of 10 housing providers who responded said that they were going to look to use technology more to support residents who may be self-isolating or shielding. Genuine end-to-end solutions are rare, but that is a growing area of interest for almost all of the respondents to the survey. In the past, there have been challenges with particular manufacturers sticking to particular proprietary products and proprietary protocols. And I think that the level of real innovation versus promised roadmaps is something that needs a spotlight shined on it. And Jeremy, I know you and your team are very focused on talk about things that really exist in the real world, as well as looking at the hypothetical examples that could exist or transform service and living experiences in the future.
Absolutely. So some people do think that my head is in the cloud, let alone working within clouds. But no, absolutely. So we want to ground it in reality. But we also need to stretch both our thinking so that we can be smarter, anticipating the types of services provision, but also consumer wants and needs going forward. And where does digital help both capture that raw data, but also help us to interpret it and to create the solutions for future products or development and purchase or commissioned care.
Very good. Mark, one of the things that a number of people will feel concerned about is that in this world of more frequent innovation cycles, how do they as organizations and their customers avoid the feeling of constant change?
So I think technology's got a very clear benefit, but firstly, there's only a benefit if it is adopted, and that's by colleagues, by customers and suppliers. And as Jeremy's already said, that is amplified significantly if we can get an integration between health, social care, and all the key stakeholders are brought into this. We don't want tech for tech's sake. What we want is credible solutions with clearly defined benefits that have to be easy to use. And I think one of the keys to that is the underlying architecture, which has to make it easy to upgrade the tech. So as we've already talked about cloud services, platform and software as a service is constructed to deliver tech in a simple fashion. It's constructed to deliver the latest version of a service. And it also gives rise to the idea of a number of different commercial arrangements. So things like, do we consider a tech refresh at a certain stage? So rather than right now, there's shelter accommodation schemes that have got equipment that's 30 years old, which is not fit for purpose, it's not doing its job. So things like a tech refresh at a stage in the life cycle. Do we look at the different ways of billing? Do we look at actually making home units dumber and more smarts in the cloud so that we can upgrade it on a regular basis?
And in terms of, Jeremy, the areas within the Housing LIN that you direct people to, you talked about the digital pages that you've got. What else of the services you and your colleagues offer do you think are most beneficial to those who are looking at trying to understand what the range of options are?
Yeah, so we've got sort of like a sliding scale of ways that members can participate, and I want to sort of say that this is a free offer that we give to our members, but it is based on a co-production that we have with a real solid set of supporters, including Apello. So on behalf of the LIN, thanks Tim and the team for supporting us. But so we do a lot of information sharing, we capture good practice, we sort of produce that into sort of bite-sized chunks for people to understand. We sort of, like we've done this afternoon and how you've set out the questions, we sort of help people roadmap these issues through. And then when people need a little bit more support, perhaps around their digital maturity, for example, we will look at the types of questions that organisation has and perhaps help craft a small learning improvement programme with that agency to help them better understand what the opportunities are, both for their customers, but also their staff, and longer term, what their long-term ambitions are. The third bit really is about how we can look at the future innovations and research some of this and look at product development. And there we work with both academic and non-academic partners and industry and the trade bodies to really try and craft this and share the learning about what is really robust evidence for both the business case, but also the outcomes that can be delivered to improve quality of life. Yeah.
And Mark, this last question, I'm guessing plays into the point you were making earlier about a tech refresh model.
Yeah, I think it's about how we look at tech refresh models and what we refresh. I think it's about looking at proven digital technology, so not something that's on a roadmap, but obviously something that has a future roadmap, so something that's in use, so that we can prove and we can touch and hold, but something that we know is being developed for future services. Key, and I know I bang on about this, is open protocols with documented standards, and that's both in terms of transmission, so that's how outfield equipment talks to a monitoring centre, and that's in terms of radio standards as well, so how peripherals talk to a scheme or how peripherals talk to a dispersed alarm. And the other piece, as I've already said, but it's using cloud-based services that are designed to allow data portability. So the last piece for me, I think, is looking at the partnerships that the supplier has with other suppliers in the industry. So what's the compatibility between Apello and John Tech and and other suppliers in the industry? Because more and more they're starting to work together. The ones that are working together are the ones that you need to be talking to.
Very helpful. Just before we move on to the Q&As that have been pasted today, as opposed to the ones that were posted on registration, I will just give a quick plug to the third and final report, which was launched earlier on this month. It's about the number of trends, a number of key trends that you'll see in technology-enabled care services during 2021 and beyond. It's already had multiple hundred downloads, so we know it's landing well. Please, if you haven't already, both check it out on our website or on the Housing LIN's resources for those who remember. And please sign up for the webinar, which we'll be hosting around this time next month. So that's the formal part over with. And I think it would be useful now, Ian, if you could just step us quickly through the questions.
Yeah, certainly, Tim. So just a reminder, if you did want to ask any questions, use the Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen. So the first question in, Tim, is one of the main challenges to embracing tech in supported living for people with learning difficulties appears to be trusting the equipment. Families and care managers are concerned that tech will not be as good as sleep-in members of staff. How do we change that mentality?
So that's a really good question, and I think one of the things that's very important as a starting principle is that it shouldn't always be assumption that tech replaces people. What it should be doing is, in some instances, potentially it does, but in other instances, it means those people who are present are able to do much better quality work because they have much more insight. The example I give regularly is a carer for somebody with Alzheimer's or learning difficulties or just with general infirmity. Typically, that carer will arrive. They will have no insight as to what the last 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours have led to for the person since their last visit. Whereas technology-enabled care can provide really rich insights into what their living patterns have been in that preceding period since the last visit. So I don't ever want to make a starting assumption that TECS will always replace people. But at the same time, there are very clear examples in certain situations where sleeping nights or waking nights can either be transferred from waking nights to sleeping nights or sleeping nights to off-site through greater insights that are available in the home or location that provide that certainty of something has changed, action needs to be taken. So I hope that answers the question in a relatively general but useful fashion. Ian?
Next question we got is how safe and secure are cloud services?
No, Jeremy, you wanted to add something to that?
Sorry, I can just add to it, because I think the questioner makes a really important point around how to make the functionality inclusive so that both it supports the way we operate the schemes in terms of providing the safeguards in terms of waking night cover or sleepiness, this particular question, but also to recognise people with learning disability, autism, people with dementia, other long-term conditions can also benefit from having some enhanced support through technology, both to manage challenging behaviours, but also to help them having a meaningful activity in whether it may be gaming, it may be looking about food preparation. It could also help facilitate some independence as well. And I think that's what's really important. Supported housing is called supported housing because it supports the person in a housing setting. It's not an institution. It's about creating independence.
Really good insights. Ian?
So yeah, the next question was how safe and secure are cloud services?
Mark, you will have a strong view on this as a key proponent of cloud services across the number of organisations you worked for.
Absolutely, and the answer is, providing they are professionally delivered cloud services, extremely safe and secure. So, for example, we use Microsoft Azure, and Azure is widely considered to be the safest and most secure cloud service delivery in the world right now. Because cloud services, as I said earlier on, delivered in a professional manner, come from people that spend millions and millions of pounds on infrastructure to deliver these services. That's what makes a difference.
Very good. Ian?
So somebody asking a question from a local authority here. It's how should local authorities look to increase appetite for greater use of technology internally?
I will offer a view on that, and then Jeremy, I'm sure you've also got an insight as well. So I think the first thing is to start with that principle of what do we want social care to look like for our residents? What is it that we would like to change about the experience they currently enjoy or in some instances don't enjoy? So don't start with the technology, start with the outcome you're looking for. That I think is the first learning. Then through engagement with stakeholders and with end customers, you're able to design a slightly better or significantly better service model, and then understanding how technology can play a part in delivering that becomes the next stage, rather than starting off with what tech is there out there, what could we do with it? Jeremy, thoughts?
Local government has a real critical role to play and has been playing a role within technology for many, many years. So whether it's around community safety, whether it's around highways, whether it's around education, but also adult social care as well. I think we need to move away from, though, is silo thinking within local authorities. And what I've seen, I posted in the response in the chat box, is that the LGA and working with local authorities are working on a digital transformation program, recognizing this is a corporate issue for them, not just a departmental issue. And I think that really starts raising the stakes, because local authorities are also major investors in our communities, both through our taxpayers' money in terms of local taxation, but also in delivering major national programs. So I think digital technology, we can make sure we can plug in better with local authorities and understand how they deliver to citizens, as well as those people who are those citizens who need care and support.
Great, really helpful. Ian, next question.
How do we get residents engaged with training on technology?
So this I've got a really strong view on. Firstly, make sure the technology that you're adopting is easy to use and the benefits are very clear. So, you know, just a plug for our own services, but because this is a very good example of it. Smart Living Solutions has a video touch display screen which goes into a residence apartment in sheltered accommodation and replaces the traditional beige blocks. Now, how do you get residents to engage in it? You make the functionality very straightforward and simple, and you make sure that there is a very clear benefit for them doing so. So we've had fantastic feedback from those residents who've now been able to have video door entry for the very first time in their lives in accommodation, for them to be able to have video apartment to apartment calling. They don't have access to Skype, the majority of people. They don't have in sheltered housing of a certain demographic. They don't have or don't fully understand the use of FaceTime, but being able to tap one icon and then an address book is a really simple and easy to use system for residents of any age. So I think the most important thing is that the benefits are clear to the resident. They understand why they would want to do it. And secondly, that the ease of use is so simple. Now, having a whole catalogue of how-to videos, training manuals, etc., for on-site staff, all of that's useful backdrop. But the feedback we've had has been that just so many of the residents feel the quality of their life has been improved because they've had access to very simple to use tools which give them a life enhancing benefit.
I would echo what Tim's saying. I think that easy to use, easy to access is really important, because residents then can quickly appraise how to use it. A lot of people are digitally excluded, and therefore there is an issue about how to support through our both activities coordinators or through scheme support staff, or indeed volunteers, how to look at to enable that to happen. But I also think what we're seeing over the last sort of 2 or 3 years is a transformation of where housing providers themselves are engaging much more with their residents about understanding their future needs. So not just around the utilisation of technology, but also what is the meaning of the type of sheltered housing service they receive. They may not want a resident warden. They may want to have somebody who comes in twice a day, or somebody they can call when they want to call. So again, it means that it's part of a continuous learning and improvement. And I'm very keen on the term living lab. And I think residents are a living lab in terms of the group setting they live in.
Provided the housing provider is forward thinking enough to really engage with them about what they want that experience to be like in the future.
Yeah, talk to Apello, talk to us about that.
Yes. Hey, Ian, question?
Just adding on to that last point, I think what I would add is is to talk to the residents about what training materials they need. So some of the materials that we've developed have come off the back of great ideas from the residents themselves, things that we would have never thought of or considered, and we've taken that on board and developed things that they've kind of asked for, and that's kind of been one of our approaches.
True.
Yeah, those customer insights are invaluable.
Lovely. Ian?
The next question is so an interesting one. So what has been your big learning over the last 9 months in improving resident wellbeing?
Well, I'll pass over to you in a moment, Jeremy, to give thoughts about what you've learned from engagement with housing providers, the NHS, and so on. I'm not going to limit myself to one if I'm maybe so bold. There are two things we've really learned. So one, we've had fantastic feedback from housing providers about how our services have enabled them to deliver a better living experience, and that ability to work remotely and yet still deliver a really good resident support mechanism has been a huge learning. We've always known that was one of the benefits of smart living solutions, but we've seen our order book grow very significantly over the last few months as housing providers who have already got some of their rollouts underway have started to accelerate those to try and deliver those benefits to a wider customer set. So that's the first thing, that the engagement via video and social channels, video and social inclusion has been a fundamental help. The second thing I would say that we've really learned is that adaptability and flexibility of the solutions we design has been really important. And we had instances of, and we've shared this on some of the other web chats, but we had instances of residents hosting their own video bingo over smart living solutions because they wanted to create a sense of community, and having solutions like ours which are adaptable and flexible at relatively short notice is something that we think has been a really big takeaway, and we continue to think about how we can evolve that into even more of our solutions. Jeremy, things you've learned, or the NHS, the social care and housing system have learned during COVID?
I think two things. One is about how to get close to customer, and over COVID, what I think people have felt most in terms of the well-being is not being able to participate as closely as possible, either with other residents or with their family, friends and wider networks. So what we've done in the LIN is we pull together an A to Z of different techniques that people have used to remain connected, and virtually every one of those is a non-personal contact through some use of technology or kit, which has facilitated their ability to connect. So whether it's a buddying system or befriending, or whether it's doing online jigsaws or chess, those sort of things. So I think what has come out is that the enablement bit of technology has meant that people can participate and feel that they have a meaning to life. So whether it's a virtual choir or just a coffee over the line, so to speak, is really important. But from a professional, I think also is the wake up that actually a lot of their clients, their customers are getting smarter about what they want in terms of the information they want to have about them, but also what they want to share with, so that they can make sure they're getting the best service they can. And whether it's from supporting people street homeless through text messaging, right through to extra care housing in terms of sort of providing a better digital interface.
Very, very true. Very true. Ian, I think we've got a couple of questions left, and we're almost at time, so let's try and get through those.
So the last couple are: what digital protocols standards do Apello utilise?
Mark, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, in terms of digital protocols, we utilise BS8521-2, which is now IP version 1.6. We also utilise EN 50134 Part 9, which is the European SCAPE protocol derivative, sometimes referred to as the Senelec protocol. So now IP is what we signal for all of our sheltered accommodations, so SLS signals now IP, using voice over IP, and be clear that digital protocol uses a digital signal and voice over IP, and our dispersed alarm signals the 50134 Part 9 Senelec protocol.
Do you want to say why the video, why the voice over internet is important in a cost saving perspective?
Yeah, it's important. So if we don't use voice over IP, to open a speech channel, you either have a unit dialing into a monitoring centre, making a telephone call, or more commonly, a monitoring centre dialing out to a unit. Now, these telephone calls can be anything from 20 pence to set up. So we found one that was £4.50. So every time a unit called into the monitoring centre was charged a minimum of £4.50 for each call. And of course, the other thing is that moving forward, telephony will have to be digital, will have to be using SIP lines, which are much more suited to voice over IP. And telephony providers will be using voice over IP. It's sensible.
Thanks, Mark. Ian, last question.
Yes, the last question is, so supported living and extra care often get lumped in together when looking at housing with support. Is there any plans from Apello to create a package which is ultimately more focused at an extra care type demographic?
Yeah, Mark, if you give some answers to that, and then Jeremy, I know you do a lot of work thinking about both extra care, sheltered, and where the beauties of similarity are and where the differences should look. So, Mark, do you want to say a few words first?
Yeah, so the answer is absolutely yes, because with extra care you can build on a digital platform and you can start layering the services on top of that. And so the services can be as straightforward as video calling services. They can be additional peripheral services, or they can even be virtual visiting. But the beauty of being able to do this is we can start putting packages together. We've talked about the data and how we've got a much richer data set. So the package that we put together can be modified for extra care once we've got some historical data. So we put a package together which is our best view. We monitor that package, we monitor how it performs, and then we modify it to improve the outcomes of the package.
And I think just building on that and giving a really simple example, in traditional sheltered, our I'm okay function is set by the resident and closed remotely when the house manager has dealt with the I'm okay or not, I'm not okay as appropriate. In an extra care setting, that can only be closed down with a code being entered on the room unit to verify that the resident has actually been visited. So that's an example of the subtle nuances which we can create and customize for extra care settings, as well as Mark said, a much richer set of sensors and peripherals which can be included as well. Jeremy, you think a lot about these areas.
Echoing what you're saying, I think that sliding scale is important, and to customize it is vital. I'll just add that in terms of group living and extra care housing and supported living, I see the way forward as equally as important as looking at fire safety and fire protection. We need to build in digital protection. In fact, we should marry the two together, because actually there's ways that we can support the way we we capture the data around smoke, fire, all those sort of things. And Mark probably knows a lot more about that than I do. But I do think there's an integration here of those sort of key features which can both be customized but also provide the safeguards that a resident wants to know that they'll be living in a quality, safe environment.
Excellent. So any further questions, Ian?
No, that was the last one.
And the chat comments, anything out of those that's particularly worth flagging?
Well, Jeremy has posted some really useful links. So what I do is I will ensure that they are shared with everybody who's been on the webinar, post-webinar, so that they can have access to them.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. It's really gratifying that so many of you have taken time out of your days. We genuinely hope this has been useful and interesting. As I mentioned, we're hosting another one of these in about a month on the big trends for 2021 that the report indicates are likely to come to fruition. If there's anything we can help with in the meantime, then please do get in touch. We'd be delighted to help support you, even if it's just in terms of understanding the range of possibilities that you can deliver for residents and end service users over the future. With that, I will thank you again for your time and attendance. Really appreciate it, and you can log off, and we will bid you farewell. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.